Okay, just to recap, the goal at this point is to get the table out and assess it for repairability. I'm convinced that at the factory, this machine was assembled with the table complete on the base, and then the frame, these side frames, were attached afterwards. And the reason I say that is there are parts of the table that are simply not accessible because the frames are in the way. So I'm going to start by loosening some gibs. There's a gib here and a gib over here to give the table some play within the confines of the frame. And then we'll get the frames off. In an earlier segment, I neglected to include taking apart the drivetrain. So this was done prior to removing the cutter head and the motor. And the way the belt tensioner, the chain reduction transmission, and the large pulley assembly with the Reeves drive were put together suggests the drivetrain was all assembled to the frame on the bench at the factory. And then the completed frame was assembled to the table and bolted to the machine base. Like everything else, you can see from these photos that rust removal will be a big task. That should be enough to give it some play. Both frames are aligned with some roll pins, and then this left frame is held in with 4 bolts. There's 2 on this side and 2 over here. These are the fasteners from that left frame, and they're pretty typical of all the bolts. They're pretty rusty. I'll clean these up and reuse them, but I'm going to get rid of these lock washers, and I'll use like a grade 8 flat washer and use Loctite on the threads. Now throughout this series, you've probably seen me putting parts in bags and boxes, and you have a project like this that's long running, you really have to stay organized because you'll quickly forget where things go. Photo documenting helps, but it also is good to just put things in a bag with a label of what it is. The roll pins are pretty tight, so what I've ended up doing is I've clamped the block to the sidewall of the frame and put a threaded rod up from the bottom. So that threaded rod will push against that block and separate the frame from the base. Okay, now that we've got the left frame removed, let's take just a quick tour of a couple things. These 2 bars here and here, they are the gibs that slide against the frame for vertical travel. These screws here and here adjust the height of the rollers. And that's the gib that I loosened before we removed the frame, so that adjusts the lash or the free play between these guides here and the frame. This center bolt on the motor side frame is interfering with that rib right there, so it's really hard to turn. I think when I put this back in, I'm going to put a socket head cap screw in there. I was only able to hand screw this the last few turns. This last one came out fine. It was a little bit tight. So, well, on the motor frame, I was unable to put the threaded rod up from the bottom because that hole is not threaded all the way through. So I just put the nuts back in there and clamped a block above it, and it seems to be working quite nicely to jack up the frame. Jack it up off that roll pin. So that's the inside of the motor side frame. And And there's another mud dauber nest. They get everywhere. The next phase of disassembly is going to be loosening these guide bars, and I think the guide bars and the rollers will come out as an assembly, and I can bench it to remove the guide bars from the rollers and then remove all this hardware. Okay, I realized when I removed this roller assembly, which came out very nicely, I realized that this assembly is not going to be able to lift up. So I made a board to support the roller, and I'll remove one side, one guide bar, and then slide it out that way. I have these bolts just loose enough to hold this plate off, so it doesn't fall out. So the bearings for these rollers appear to be retained by some roll pins. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out, trying to open that up and replace those bearings. I took a wire brush and cleaned up a few areas on this, including the shaft underneath there and a little bit of the gears. And the more I work on this thing, the more I think that this whole table was assembled on the bench in the factory and then inverted and put into the base. So these 4 bolts here, here, and here, I think when those come out, the whole table could be lifted up off the base. Be that as it may, I'm going to try to remove these collars. There's a collar here and one on the other side, and try to loosen the set screws on the gears and see if I can remove that horizontal shaft. Voila. Well, now that horizontal shaft is out, I thought it would be a convenient time to remove the top plate, because I can access these 4 bolts here. But curious, 2 of the bolts are already loose. This one and this one. Let's see what we have here. Now that I've got that center plate off, I was looking at these bolts. These are the 2 bolts that were actually tight, and they got these grinding marks on them. So I don't know if they were interfering with the gears, and so manufacturing assembly they ground the bolts off. We'll have to look at that when we put the thing back together. If we can remove these 2 top gears, we should be able to lift the table off. Do a little cleaning up here with the grease. I was having trouble getting that second gear off because the gears are hitting on that boss sticking out there. So I'll need to jack up the whole table and put some taller stands underneath it, and then I can screw down those posts and get the gear off. Earlier I put some screws through this plate into these blocks to hold up the table. So I removed those and added some cleats with clamps because I need to be able to lift that table off and put it on the bench over there. Before I get into the heart of the matter with the table, I'll go ahead and remove these lift screws from the base. So if this is the front of the machine, here's the motor side, here's the gearbox side, in feed right here. The left screw is a right hand thread and the right screw is a left hand thread. So I'll have to be sure and mark those so I get them in the right spot. These are the thrust bearings. I wanted to back up briefly and put these back in here and explain why these quarter arc cutouts are here for the fastening bolts. These allow the screws to be adjusted slightly up and down so that the table can be level and made parallel to the cutter head. Okay, this is the heart of the matter. Here's the table, and then the broken piece that you haven't seen yet. And there's the brake on one side. I think that it took the hit right there. So the next thing I'll do, I'll take this and I'll clean it up as best I can. And there's a couple places in town that do fabrication repair. I'll take it to them and see what they think about repairability. Well, thanks again for watching. Check back every now and then and see if we have some more activity getting that old machine repaired. Next time I hope to have some activity getting the table cleaned up and ready for repair, and then we'll have a little surprise with a new addition to the family. Thanks again for watching.